This is my associated DR10 drag car. This is a team kit. This is not the ready to run. I prefer to put my models together so I know how they go together, so it's easier to repair them when they need it. And it comes with some hop-ups that you would have to purchase separately. I prefer the RTRs in things that I just like to play around with, like the Losi Mini T there on the left, and the associated rival monster truck 18th scale. On the right is a RC10L that I used to race about 30 years ago at a local track. Had a lot of fun doing that, and it's just been sitting on a shelf. So being a fan of drag racing since I was probably 8 years old, I've been waiting for a reasonable way to get into doing some drag racing, so I picked up the DR10. I intended this video to be only about 5 or 6 minutes long, but as I went through the build and did some additional videos, it kind of stretched out. But along the way, I'm going to show you a couple of tips, a couple of things I've noticed in the build. I'm not going to go through and do all the nuts and bolts and bore you with a high-speed video of how I put the whole thing together. That's just senseless. So let's get this box opened up, make sure we got everything we need, and then we'll get to wrenching on this thing. Okay, I know I said I wasn't going to give you the high-speed video, but I left this in here just so you can kind of see how the thing is packed, and you know, you can make your own decisions whether you want to get an RTR or an upgrade from there, or go through and do the actual build like I've done here. Just one quick note, something I found to be very helpful when building anything that has multiple parts is just simple little bowls. If you've got them in plastic, that's fine. These are just paper Dixie bowls. And when you take your parts out of the bag, you can dump them in here. Then you know you're not missing anything. They don't get knocked off the table. They don't end up where they don't belong. The steering blocks, and in here you've got the stub axles on bearings, and then you have the actual steering block. One thing I'm a little disappointed here is that the bell crank for the steering is all on bearings, and it moves nice, as long as you don't over tighten things. But in the steering blocks, they've decided to go with block bushings, caster block bushings, and they attach with a screw at the top, one at the bottom, through the bushing, and then into the spindles. And the movement on this is rather stiff, and I'm sure it'll loosen up with time, but that's just because things are wearing. So I think I'm going to go online and see if there's a better solution for this. Okay, so I've just went online and I went to my known sources for RC parts, and although I can get the caster block in aluminum, I can get the steering knuckles in aluminum, they all use the same system of a plastic bushing. The plastic bushing, you can see here, is shiny as opposed to the filled plastic, which has a dull matte look to it. But it looks like I'm going to have to stick with the way it was designed for now. What I'm thinking is that it's just not enough room inside the wheel well where the axle is to use some kind of a bearing for the actual steering. So I'm going to trust they'll loosen up a little bit, but right now they seem fairly stiff, especially since the bell crank in the chassis is so smooth on bearings. Okay, this is day 2 of my build. This is what I got accomplished last evening when I put things together. The transmission is built, although it's not installed yet, because on this step I was required to put on the motor guard and the rear body mounts. And this is the stock one that comes in the factory. and I decided that I was going to replace this. So I picked up DRC, otherwise known as Drag Race Concepts, an aluminum body guard, and you can see it doesn't flex like the other one. A couple other things I picked up: the wheelie bar mount. I got the ESC mount, and also a wheelie bar, because from everything I've seen on other video posts, the wheelie bar is flexible, to say the least. So we're going to get started again and proceed on with the new parts. As you can see here, I've got the motor guard in place, and those two screws that you see sticking out, I've already started those holes by pre-threading it, and I was able to hand thread these in just to get them started. And now I'll go ahead and cut the rest of the thread as I tighten them down. But pre-cutting the threads into the hole, turn, maybe 2 turns, is really helpful and kind of speeds things along, makes it a lot easier to put things together, especially if you have to hold them in place to get the screw going. So again, just a quick tip there. This was not a ready to run. It comes as a rolling chassis without wheels. They do, without tires. They do give you wheels. No electronics, speed control, motor, receiver, none of that's in there. The build went very nice. I didn't run into any real problems. A couple changes I made as I was putting it together. I decided not to go with the stock wheelie bar. Picked up the Drag Race Concepts wheelie bar that's made out of carbon fiber, and it is much stiffer. I'm waiting for my replacement wheels that have actual rubber on them. Also, the motor guard and the mount for the wheelie bar from Drag Race Concepts, so I could put that on there. Another Drag Race Concepts addition is the anti-roll bar, because the one that comes in the kit, although I'm sure it works to some degree, it does not have the rigidity of what a real anti-roll bar would be. It's basically the rod is a heavy piece of piano wire, so there's going to be twist and flex in it. An addition I made when I was putting the shocks on is I noticed that the retainers for the shocks and the top mount of the shock were very loose. So I just grabbed some silicone fuel tube, cut it, and put it on the end between the shock and the flange nut to keep it from moving around. I did that on both front and back. So one other addition I made with the shocks is I added a stop. Just used a little bit of silicone fuel tubing to limit its down travel. And inside there's also a limiter so it doesn't fully extend. That way the ride height sits pretty level and only has a little bit of movement there. And in the kit comes 30 weight oil, and I knew 30 weight was going to be too light, so I picked up an assortment. Got low-C oils here from 50 up to 100. I decided to start with the 80. I'll see how that works, and then I can put in a little bit lighter, a little bit heavier, decide I want to change up the dampening on it. I also added silicone tube to the rear shocks, a little hard to see there, to limit the down travel. And again, in the back we've got probably about 3/8 of an inch. Don't need much more than that. It does come with a receiver box that would mount here, and I decided not to put that in. It's basically a water resistant box for your receiver, and I didn't see a need for it because I am not going to be drag racing in the rain. Another addition is the electronic speed control mount. Instead of putting it off center, it mounts it directly in line and above the battery. I am waiting on a new speed controller. I had this one and the motor. I had them, so I put them in. I'm waiting on a Pt1 speed controller and a 4.5 turn motor to put in here. One other thing that comes with the anti-sway bar is a new shock mount, and what that really does is it lines your shocks up so they're almost straight up and down. The kit would have this in farther and the shocks would be sitting at an angle, so they're virtually straight up and down here. As you can see, I've got a finned heatsink that I had left over from racing my on-road days. So I just added that to the motor for now, but you can see the movement here in the rear. And it's good. The tires don't change much. And normal ride height's about there. It's got enough to go down a little and enough to come up just a bit. So I've got two bodies. I've got a Camaro IROC Z body that I'm going to paint, and I've also got a 69 Hemi Cuda. And I'll get some paint on over the weekend. So I'll check back with you when I get that. Also, the speed controller and motor are in shipping. They're on their way. I'll get those added on here, and I'll let you take a look at the finished product.